Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're going to tackle something that's at the very heart of scientific work, the lab report. And to do that, we're going to be leaning on the excellent guide, Academic Writing, Simple Concepts and Easy Skills by Mohammed AbdEllah to really break it all down. So let's just dive right in. All right, let me start by asking you something. When is a scientific experiment really over? I mean, is it when you've cleaned the last beaker? Or maybe when you've plotted that final data point on your graph? Well, the answer is actually no. A scientific experiment isn't truly finished until its story has been told. And that story, well, that's the lab report. So here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to follow the natural structure of this scientific story. We'll start with the plot, its whole purpose, and then we'll walk through each chapter, from the why of the introduction to the how of the methods, all the way to the big so what of the conclusion. Okay, first things first, we got to shift how we think about a lab report. It's not just some assignment you're turning in for a grade. Nope, it's the official, permanent story of a scientific investigation. And this story, it has three really important missions. First up, its main job is to document everything. It creates this formal, permanent record of the entire process. And that's not just for your professor, it's for the scientific record itself. Second, it has to communicate, Science is really a team sport. And your report is the way you let other people learn from, check, and even build on the work you've done. And finally, its job is to demonstrate your understanding. A really well-written lab report is proof that you've got a handle on the entire scientific process, from coming up with the initial question all the way to the final conclusion. All right, so now that we know why lab reports are so important, let's open up the first chapter of our story, the introduction. This whole section is dedicated to answering the most basic question of all. Why did we even do this experiment in the first place? So, that big why question, the intro tackles it in three key chunks. First, you give the necessary background, the context. Then you state your specific, testable hypothesis, which is really just your educated guess about what's going to happen. And finally, you clearly lay out your variables, the things you're actually changing and measuring. Okay, next up is the how. The methods and materials section is, for all intents and purposes, the detailed recipe for your experiment. This is where you lay out with crystal clarity exactly how you did what you did. And this, right here, gets to the absolute core of what makes science work: replicability. Your recipe has to be so precise that another scientist anywhere on the planet could follow your steps and hopefully get the same results. That's the bedrock of scientific trust. Yeah, you really have to think of it like a super strict procedure. You list every single material, everything, from chemicals to the specific software you used. Then you describe your methods in order, step by step, leaving zero room for guessing. All right, so we've covered the why and the how. Now it's time for the what. The results section is where you present the raw, unfiltered data that you've collected. There's no opinion here, no interpretation. It's just the cold, hard facts. Now, this is a super important point, so listen up. The results section is strictly for presenting the facts, what the numbers say, what you observed. The interpretation, the analysis, the story of what it all means, all of that comes later, in the discussion section. Don't get them mixed up. And look, the best way to show these facts is visually, right? With clean charts, tables, and graphs. For example, if you were testing different fertilizers on trees, a simple bar chart like this tells the story instantly. It's all about making the data clear and objective. And here we are, the grand finale of our scientific story, the discussion and conclusion. This is where you finally get to answer that huge question. So what? What does all this data actually tell us? Really, the heart of this whole section is a simple comparison. You take your original hypothesis, your prediction, and you put it right up against your actual results. Did the data back you up, or did it tell you something completely different? This is where you interpret everything and explain what you found. And then you've got to stick the landing with a strong conclusion. You basically do three things. Summarize your most important findings, be honest about any limitations or potential errors in your experiment, and, this is key, point the way forward. You suggest what the next experiment could be. You ask, where does the science go from here? And of course, no scientific story just appears out of thin air, right? The references section is where you give credit where it's due. You cite all the sources that helped shape your work. officially plugging your experiment into that huge, ongoing conversation that is science. So, you see, a lab report is way more than just a paper you turn in. It's a narrative of discovery. It's your own unique contribution to our collective search for knowledge. So the only question left is, what scientific story will you tell?